For the past few years, Egleston Square has been a fault line for dramatic change in the city's housing market. Located in Roxbury on the border of Jamaica Plain, the area is attracting more investors to build or redevelop housing. But there's a downside for some people who struggle to pay the rent, not to mention a gap between market prices and neighborhood incomes. We recently focused on one piece of the story concerning a multifamily home on School Street. Tonight we hear from the company that acquired the home, City Realty Group. Our guest is the Director of Acquisitions, Clifford Kensington. Thank you very much for being with us, Clifford.
Thanks a lot.
The City Realty Group has done a lot of investing, developing in Boston and even around Egleston Square. Talk about this one property, because there's so much to keep you busy. Why plunge into this?
Sure. I mean, it's definitely, it's no secret that the market is really hot. There's a lot of people out there looking for properties in that area, and this is one that we saw as a pretty attractive piece of property. It's 6 units in an area that's traditionally more 2 or 3 families, so there's a little higher density than kind of a lot of what's existing property, and we knew there had been attempts to sell it in the past, and we'd kind of knew it was out there on the market, but when the seller really was motivated to sell, they kind of came back around to us, and we were able to make a deal with them.
Well, I guess one thing you probably knew, even before you acquired the property, is that there were tenants there, they were organizing, they had an agenda, they didn't want to be displaced, so you knew you're going to have to get into the bargaining table here.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something we do a lot of the times. We're very familiar with that. I mean, a lot of times it's pretty rare that we'll buy any properties that don't have tenants, at least in some of the units. This one had, I think, 1 vacancy, but the rest of the 5 were currently tenanted. And as when we acquired the property, we expected that we would kind of go through what we normally do: is we immediately introduce ourselves to the tenants. We sit down, we talk to them, we let them know who we are. In this one, I mean, it was no secret that the property had a lot of deferred maintenance and had a lot of even code violations that had to be immediately addressed. So one of our first topics of conversation was, this is the plan, what we're looking to do. We know we need to make some repairs. Here's kind of how that's going to look. Here's the timeline, and we need their cooperation to kind of work through it. I mean, some of it, they had to be temporarily relocated to a hotel while we did some de-letting or more serious work. Others we were able to kind of do while keeping them in place, but it definitely requires a lot of communication with the tenants.
Well, just talk about addressing the problems in the building. What's the fair distribution here? Because on the one hand, tenants who benefit from the improvements should take on some of that, but on the other hand, the owner should make sure they're not paying too much to the previous owner for those problems too.
Sure, and that's definitely the case, and I mean, that's definitely the planned scope of work is factored into the price paid for a property every time. I mean, when it comes to kind of the bearing the cost, it's a tough balance, obviously, with all properties. But and there are a lot of people who are managing who have kind of found themselves in older properties that need a lot of work, and in some cases, like this one, are really even unsafe to be in. And sure, they get to pay a little less, but that seems like a very kind of short-term trade-off. Like long-term, it's not good for people to be in unsafe apartments just because they cost a little less. Like it's not something that should be sought after. We should really be looking to make these properties safe for people to live in.
This is BNN News. We're talking with Clifford Kensington from City Realty Group. Clifford, this is a property on School Street that, like some others around the city, you have tenants who are in there probably paying rent pretty steadily for a long time. The owners owned it a long time, so the rents didn't go up too much. And by the time it changes hands, we're faced with, not just a little bit of an increase, but almost like a quantum leap in market values.
And that would be the case if we were coming in trying to bring existing tenants up to market rents and as if they were new, but that is something that we very rarely seek to do. We understand, we're very sensitive to the unique needs of an existing tenant who has years old leases or years old rent levels. Like with all of our tenants, whether they're existing or and lower income, or whether something's happened over the course, some kind of financial hardship, we always make it a policy to meet with tenants individually and try to work out a plan that works for them, and not try to make blanket rules, not try to create a one-size-fits-all rule. And that's what we did with these tenants here. We didn't try to do any adjustments to the rent while work was going on. We understood that that was a kind of a bit of a hardship, and it was kind of a bit of an upheaval area while the repairs were going on around them. But once we were able to get the properties kind of up to code and even above code in condition, we wanted to meet with them and offer to meet with each tenant individually, go over what their income was, go by the city's guide for what would be an affordable rent for that income, and sign a lease based on that rent level and what would be sustainable for each tenant individually.
So talk about the tenants were going from paying something like $800, $850, $900 a month to, so your offer to them was what exactly?
So, I mean, like I said, our first offer was not a hard number. We wanted to create a individualized rent for each unit, because if someone was making an income where $1,000 a month is the max they can afford, then we wanted to do that. But if someone was able to afford to pay more, we wanted to be able to obviously reach a level. We do want the fair rent for the property, but we're not looking to get every last dollar. We were willing to make a deal with them. And so they might have ranged between $1,000 to $1,500 depending on the tenant, but unfortunately, none of the tenants were willing to come in and give us any information about their income or employment status.
Well, they did make a disclosure to a third party, though, didn't they?
They say they did. We never received any of the information or any info from the third party. And I mean, this is something was not a unique ask of them. I mean, anybody who applies to an apartment with us as part of their rental application needs to show that they have a job, need to provide their income. Sometimes a credit check is necessary. We didn't think we were asking something unusual, because we ask it for hundreds of tenants.
Yeah, but they're not new tenants. They've been in this house.
They are in existing tenants, but on the other hand, they are claiming to have a unique situation and a unique hardship. And all we were asking for was just verification that that hardship did in fact exist, and that they were lower income tenants who needed this special dispensation.
But if they didn't need it, wouldn't they have just moved out and found something else, maybe?
I mean, but when the alternative is they continued to pay $850 a month as they were currently doing, it's understandable why they wouldn't move out. They were not willing to pay more than that, and then finally, after months of negotiation, they created a hard line in the sand that none of them were willing to pay more than $1,050 a month, which is tough, especially when we didn't receive any direct evidence that that is the most they could pay. So this became, rather than becoming a discussion about what is the best rent for you and what you can afford, it became a negotiation where one side was creating a hard line in the sand and not willing to negotiate further. And we were left with little recourse beyond just to continue asking for more discussion and more information.
Put this into perspective, because I think the figures that I heard both from your company and from City Life, there was an offer, at least at one stage, of something like $1,350 a month.
Yeah, so we did we didn't want to shut down communications completely, so when forced with having to make a hard offer completely absent of any information about their income, we made the offer of $1,350 a month, because that's really was at the low end of how low we could go. I mean, we do have a mortgage on the property. We do have employees and management companies. We have another investor in the property that has certain standards, and we can't just ask all of them to take less in order to benefit these tenants. We had to kind of create a low end of $1,350. And that rent was also rejected.
Well, talk about how this looks, because there are two angles in this. But from one angle, it's not very high for rent. And on the other angle, if I were a family paying $900 a month, that's quite a steep increase.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a steep increase on a percentage basis. But I mean, when you talk to, I'm sure there's a lot of people in Jamaica Plain who would be very happy to pay $1,350 a month for a brand new 2-bedroom apartment. Like, there has to be some kind of consideration to the context of the neighborhood and the market that's at play. I mean, if we would also have been happy to to work with the tenants to give them the right contact so they could qualify for Section 8 vouchers or some other kind of rental assistance. But again, I mean, those would have required disclosure of income as well and a lot of background information.
Well, from another perspective, there's not a huge difference between what you're asking for and what the tenants have said that they're willing to pay. So any possibility in the future that your side and their side can work on that to come closer?
I mean, at this point, it's been over a year that we've been having these discussions, and the whole time they've continued to be paying the $800 a month, and they've made no real good faith efforts to bridge the gap. Honestly, they haven't even been willing to take back over paying for their own utilities, which they were doing before we bought the property. We took it over during the construction period, and when we asked them to restart doing it, they wouldn't do it. And then at the same time that we've been having these negotiations, many of these tenants have been standing up in community meetings or talking to politicians, basically trying to drag our name through the mud, saying that we're being unfair to them, we are trying to evict them, which we never did. And it just really didn't show we just saw no good faith efforts towards reaching an agreement. And after a year, it really started to look more like this was being used as a political tool and a kind of promotional opportunity rather than an opportunity to actually make a deal for these families.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Great, thanks for having me.
Clifford Kensington from City Realty Group.